Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Happy Saturday. Today I thought we'd have another ASBO history of Britain. This one is the Peasants Revolt and the birth of social networking. In 1381 life was difficult in the countryside. A terrible plague called the Black Death had wiped out a third of the labour force. Peasants were beginning to clamour for better working conditions. Now, the 100 Years' War with France had become so expensive that a new tax was needed to pay for it. This tax was called the poll tax, and it charged households according to how many people were in each family. In an age before proper birth control or confectionery wrappers, this was a terrible burden. One day in the Essex village of Fobbing, a strange thing occurred. A scrap of paper with, "I bet I can find 100 people against the poll tax" written on it, was found pinned to a tree. A crowd of people gathered around the tree, and although no one knew who had written the note, several people added their signatures to it. The next day, the villagers found a new note pinned to the tree which read, "They're ripping us off. Let's get 10,000 members against the poll tax." As news spread of the tree, people began to come from miles around to add their signature, and by the end of the day, the note had 600 names underneath it. Several comments had also been added. One, by a man named Wat Tyler, read, "Let's march on London and tell those bastards, lol." There was also one which read, "I prefer the old note. Bring back the old note. Who agrees with me?" which several villagers put their signatures to as well. The following week, the rumblings of discontent were beginning to spread. A note by a priest named John Ball, pinned to a tree in nearby Braintree, read, "I bet I can find 50,000 people who think when Adam delved in Eve's span, who then was the gentleman?" From the beginning, all men by nature were created alike, and our bondage, lol, or servitude, came in by the unjust oppression of wicked men. The note accumulated more than 8,000 signatures. Meanwhile, a note on a tree in Kent which read, "If 100,000 people join this group, the peasants will march on London and behead the Archbishop of Canterbury," had attracted 98,000 signatures. Rumours began to spread of a peasants' revolt, a march on London to rid England of the hated poll tax, end the system of rural servitude, and establish a new law to get sick fucks who write jokes on trees about dead Black Death victims banned from writing things on trees. Word of the troubles in the countryside soon reached the king. Richard II was just 15, and he had spent a great deal of his own time writing notes on trees. He ignored the peasants' concerns, though, preferring to read the notes written by the day's greatest entertainers and minstrels, and write comments like "fit" on notes left by young women of the palace. By the time the king's advisers made him pay attention to the problem, the Kent note had obtained its last 2,000 signatures. An army of peasants was now marching on London with rusty scythes. With Wat Tyler at the head, the peasants stormed across London Bridge, burned the tax records, opened the Marshalsea prison, ransacked the Tower of London, and dragged the Archbishop of Canterbury out of his palace and beheaded him. With London ablaze and in chaos, a note was found pinned to the palace door that read, "If one king will meet us at Mile End to hear our demands, we will tell him our demands and stop burning the city." The king had little choice but to agree. The next day he rode out with his men-at-arms to meet the peasant army at Mile End outside the city. There were tens of thousands of them, all angrily writing notes and pinning them up on any tree available. A chubby, tired-looking man named Wat Tyler approached from the multitude, carrying a pile of notes. "Mr. Tyler," said the king coldly, "I gather you are demanding that I repeal the poll tax." "Oh," said Tyler, looking a bit embarrassed. "Actually, your majesties, we've changed our minds and chosen new demands via the new notes on trees democratic process. Our final demands are on this note." The king took the note from Tyler. It read, "Raise the horse speed limit to 12 miles an hour. Make St. George's Day a bank holiday. I am English and proud. Let's break a world record for the biggest note on a tree. Jeremy Clarkson for Prime Minister. Flemish immigrants need to respect our rules and our culture. I am not a racist for saying so. I prefer the way notes on trees used to look. Bring back the old notes on trees." The king read Tyler's demands carefully and nodded. Then he did an incredibly brave thing. He spurred his horse forward and rode right into the peasants' camp, where he hammered a note of his own onto the tallest tree. It read, "If 100,000 peasants join this note and return to their homes, I will concede to all their demands." A mighty cheer went up from the crowd, and the men of Essex and Kent signed the note and began to pack up their things and disperse. It was harvest time, and there was plenty to do at home after all, especially with the world record attempt on the biggest tree note ever to look forward to. King Richard himself returned to the Tower, where, amid much feasting and joy, he began writing a new note. "I bet I can hunt down and hang the 100,000 idiots who believed me," it began. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers, patrons and members. See you next week. Bye bye.